Hi, my name is Eric Dean Wilson, and I'm here talking to Lisa Jarnot, the author of Robert Duncan, the Ambassador of Venus. Lisa is one of the final fives for the National Book Critics Circle Award in the category of Biography for 2012. We are here in New York City at the writing program of the New School. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here.
Thanks, Eric.
So, to start off with, I'm wondering how this book came about. You had been working on this for a significant amount of time, is that right?
15 years, yeah.
Wow.
So, I got to know Duncan's work when I was an undergraduate at the University of Buffalo, and I studied with Robert Creeley there. And then also I worked at the Poetry Rare Book Collection where Duncan's papers were housed. So that was my introduction to Duncan. And then in 1997, I decided I wanted to write some kind of book-length project. And I was out at the Naropa Institute teaching, and Ed Sanders was there that summer, and we talked about it, and he said, well, you know a lot about Duncan, you should really write on Duncan. So that was the beginning.
Yeah.
And then after that, many years of work. So.
That's right. And did it take you longer than you expected? Or?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Well, just, life intervenes and things happen. So I was working and I was teaching and I was writing books of poetry. And I didn't have funding for the book, so whenever I could, I would take research trips. So that was part of it as well.
Wow. And did you have a general driving principle behind which details to include in the book, or was it more of as comprehensive a chronology of his life as possible?
Well, chronology, I guess, is the key word. I didn't want to write literary criticism, and I did want to tell the story of his life and how his personal life intersected with the creation of the poems. So it's more of it was more of a journalistic project than it was, traditional academic writing.
Right. And there's a quality to him that the biography captures well, I think, and it's a kind of otherworldly presence. What Ron Solomon compared to as being visited by a creature from another dimension.
Yeah, that's a great quote. Yeah.
And the book's subtitle, too, The Ambassador of Venus, comes from Charles Olson's remark about him. And I'm wondering if you ever crossed paths with him as a young poet.
I did not. I started reading his work in 1987, and he had kidney failure in 1984, so he was very ill. I went to San Francisco the first time in 1988, and I met his lover Jess, and started to spend time with Jess then. So I spent time in the household, but it was after Duncan had died.
And did you, having not met him, did you find this quality hard to capture based purely on verbal or written accounts?
I feel like it may have helped me to not have met him, just that I had a more objective take on him. So many young people who knew him were so enthralled with him because he was so charismatic. So
I remember there's one passage from a student who says that she had hated his work, and then saw him read live and said finally she got it.
Yeah.
Which I think is so extraordinary.
Yeah.
You seem to really have to have met him to get the full experience.
Yeah, and it was quite an experience, I think.
I think so too. Yeah. You include many anecdotes and episodes of Duncan's sex life, many of which may have been kept from his husband Jess's knowledge. Were there times when you encountered an ethical question about which candid details to include or not?
When I started the book, Jess was still alive, and I interviewed certain people who said, I just don't want this in the book until after Jess dies. So Jess died in 2004, and the book was published last year, so I ended up including a lot of material that wouldn't have been in otherwise. Most people who he was intimate with, they wanted to edit what I had had written, and we worked together on it, and it worked out okay, I think.
That's good. Yeah, I think you do an artful job of telling the truth, but also not sort of making it a expose.
Yeah, I didn't want it to be. Yeah.
And you spent 15 years on this biography, and I'm wondering, did your opinions of Duncan change throughout the process, and maybe what were they before, and maybe how did they develop or change after it or during?
Well, I thought he was a great poet when I started the book. I talked to other biographers who said that in their experience of writing biographies, there was a trajectory of loving the subject and hating the subject and then feeling ambivalent about the subject. So I never really hated him. I was annoyed with some of the things that he said.
Seems like a difficult person, but charismatic.
Yeah. He was a great kind of anarchist leftist, and I appreciated that. But he had moments where he could be very picky about certain issues that I didn't agree about. But it didn't really matter in the long run. I mean, what happened was that when I came out the other end of it, I still thought he was a great poet, and that was terrific. And I feel like now I can reread the work, and I want to reread it again. And the work is so dense and so multi-layered that I feel like that is a project that I'll never come to the end of just reading.
Definitely. Yeah, did you find that knowing about his life kind of concretized some of the more mystical aspects of his poems?
Yeah.
Or contextualized maybe?
Contextualized. I think as much as he dabbled in that world, he rejected it as a system. He rejected his parents' Hermeticism, just because I think he didn't want to be tied down into any specific, belief system.
Right.
So, so that there were a lot of things that I discovered where poems seemed like they had this huge focus on the metaphysical, and then it turned out it was about something that had happened in the kitchen that night.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Egbert Foss's biography and some other secondary Robert Duncan sources. Were there any biographies that inspired you or you looked to as a guide for reconstructing the life as an artist that had nothing to do with Robert Duncan?
Well, the James Joyce biography by Ellman was a big one. I liked the Sandberg biography of Lincoln.
Oh,
and it's funny, but so those were two that I thought of.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And as I read this, I couldn't help thinking so much of it comes from, you had access to his papers and his letters, and so much of the information comes from those letters. And with the sort of current generation using email and text so much, do you have any thoughts about how in the future we might reconstruct the life out of emails without letters?
Well, it might be harder because, we have this we retain data so specifically that I feel like any biographer will have every minute of it, especially if someone's texting, right? So then you have every minute of the person's life, which seems really daunting to work through. I'm glad that Duncan didn't do email, because there was already too much material.
It sounds like it. He was all over the place geographically,
yeah.
Which seems like must have been a difficult task to pare everything down, and I can't imagine what that would be with texts and emails.
Yeah, that would
sensory
be
overload.
impossible. Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you so much for agreeing to meet with me.
Sure.
This has been lovely.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.